Hello. Many of you are doing an outstanding job navigating your way through the classroom to get the secrets of my research success tutorial. There have been some problems printing certification of the quiz scores that we clearly did not anticipate. I apologize for any problems. Please enter the tutorial through the nav bar at the top of your screen. You'll have better luck there, and I will accept a screenshot of your score too. Also, please hand in your research topic proposal via the assignment folder. They are due tomorrow on May 30th. After you select your research topic, please begin to focus on assignment number 2, the annotated bibliography, which is located in the assignment folder on the syllabus and under project descriptions. Your bibliography is due on June 27th. Excellent job discussing the rise of industry during the Gilded Age in America. A reminder that your post should be cited, and some good examples are Al's, Zach, and Jim's. So hop over and give their post a read to see how to properly cite your post. I want to spend a few minutes on some content and reflecting on industrialization. Post-Civil War America was still mostly rural, but within 60 years it would become a leading industrial power. All of you were able to pinpoint the 3 key reasons for the rapid growth of the American economy with remarkable ease with your written conversations in our discussion group. Communicating in writing is perhaps the greatest skill that you will get from an online class, so keep developing the ability to discuss different concepts and ideas with your colleagues. You're doing an outstanding job. In our discussions, you are training your mind to think and write analytically, and I find your work enlightening and very engaging. So thank you for that. So here we go. Let's look at 3 key reasons for the rapid industrial expansion after the Civil War. Number 1, America's vast natural resources aided in the economic growth. Number 2, there was an explosion of technology and innovation and inventions. And number 3, the growing urban population aided by a flood of immigrants that provided a market for buying products and a labor force to work. Natural resources, let's talk about them first. The chief natural resource was oil and its byproducts, kerosene and gasoline. Gasoline was especially necessary after the invention of the car in the 1890s. Both James and Amber had a good discussion of kerosene and noted the infinite number of uses of kerosene in the American economy and in the American home. Coal and iron were particularly important in the American economy, and we had rich iron ore deposits throughout the country. One particularly fruitful mine was 100 miles long and 1 to 3 miles wide in Minnesota. This led to the expansion of coal products and, most importantly, to the expansion and the creation of steel in America. The rise of steel was vitally important. To make steel, you remove carbon from iron and produce a lighter, more flexible product, which is rust resistant. You do this using the Bessemer process of steel making. New uses of steel were infinite, and that expanded the market. Uses of steel included railroads, barbed wire, farm machinery, the steel can, for food storage. Steel was used to build suspension bridges. The Brooklyn Bridge was built at this time, which spanned the East River in New York City. And of course, steel was vital for making skyscrapers. Let's talk about the rise of technology for making inventions and innovation. There were countless inventions to be discussed that we clearly don't have the time for here, but perhaps the most important was Thomas Edison's creation of electricity in 1876 in Menlo Park, New Jersey, his first research laboratory. The incandescent light bulb, and more importantly, his entire system of producing and distributing electricity, basically changed the way work was done in the country. And then George Westinghouse made it safer and less expensive by creating power plants that littered the landscape. Scientists then created different applications for using electricity. Electricity changed the nature of business in America. Electric power ran machines in the workplace, for instance, typewriters, the telephone, the phonograph. This led to the rise of white-collar professions. Pretty soon, electricity became available in homes throughout America, which led to the rise of appliances. And then outside of the homes, in municipalities, where we saw the rise of the use of the electric streetcar, making for local travel to become easier and cheaper. Products and markets came hand in hand with the use of these inventions, and people's everyday lives changed because of industrialization. Jobs opened up for many people. Women could have clerical jobs, and the use of the sewing machine opened up jobs for women and children in industry. This created a demand for factory, and particularly the sewing machine and professional garment workers. Mostly women and children took these jobs and worked long hours in unhealthy conditions. Jennifer's post astutely mentioned the impact of industrialization on women and children, and many of you commented on the Triangle Fire film, which resulted in the country's first attempt to organize labor. In addition, Tiffany mentioned the declining working conditions in several industries that led to the rise of union reform. The railroads were another key American industry, and because of the sheer size of the country, the notion of a transcontinental railroad created a network of railroads from east to west, and many of you had many good and relevant insights into this important industry. The railroad was made possible at the expense of railroad workers who faced stark and harsh life conditions in this hazardous job with little pay, and thousands of them were killed without notice or so much as grave markers each year. The Central Pacific Line was made possible by Chinese immigrants, and the Union Pacific Line was made possible by Irish immigrants and ex-Civil War vets who were out of work. The railroad linked spaces and communities in rapid time and introduced concepts of time zones, the Eastern, the Central, the Mountain, and the Pacific time zones. Importantly, and many of you noted this, the railroad fueled demand for other industries too: iron, coal, steel, lumber, and even glass. Jim and Ava and Tim, Kamisha and Daniel all noted how multiple industries were interrelated and created. Though none of you mentioned it, what you were talking about was the notion of vertical and horizontal integration, which was a common 18th century business practice, where industries sort of integrated other industries into their orbit. The railroad aided in this phenomenon, and all of you sort of instinctually and organically got that idea, and very impressively, were able to write about it. So please go back and read each other's writing. It was very, very impressive. Soon the railroads began to specialize in their own vein. One very good example of this would be a good research topic is George Pullman and his specialty sleeping car. Fueled by a steady workforce, George Pullman built a company town in 1881. It was a clean, well-constructed town with brick homes, libraries, theaters, churches. His workers had to live there in order to work for him and work under his very strict code. This was his method to avoid union activity. Ultimately, the railroad was a remarkable force in America, but like many big businesses, the railroad was marked by scandal, exploiting stocks in an effort to control profits. This led to corruption, and those who relied on the railroad for transportation and farmers who needed the railroad to transport their products became disillusioned and disgusted. And soon farmers, by the name of the Grangers, felt that the government was misusing the land that it was giving the railroad to lay down track, and felt that the railroad was fixing prices in order to keep the farmers in debt. The farmers demanded that the government do more to help them and find an alternate carrier for the farmers. So you can see that this created a great tension between the farmers and the government who needed the railroad to keep the country moving products. So with what the government came up with was the Interstate Commerce Act. It was the government's first attempt to regulate the railroads who were moving from state to state. The government attempted to regulate the rates that the railroad was charging. The Interstate Commerce Act was mentioned by Carol in her post. She had a very good discussion about the Interstate Commerce Act, which was ultimately a very weak attempt by the government to regulate the railroads. Soon, with this kind of tension, the regulatory process failed, and there was an ensuing economic panic of 1893, which is part of the normal capitalist process of boom and bust. Many of you, I was very impressed, were able to kind of get at this corruption of the Gilded Age that sent us right into the age of big business. Zach and Patrick's post touched on some of these issues of regulation and the beginning of the corruption of the Gilded Age that emerged. Likewise, Charles' post pushed past the industrial aspects of the age to discuss the plight of those who were politically disenfranchised. And Hannah's post, too, was an excellent read, and it reminded us that in the age of Guild and progressivism was a time of great literary growth, a time of the literary expose, exposing the corruption and the harsh conditions that gave rise to terrible conditions for many workers, and ultimately the reforms of progressivism. The growing urban population is the final area to be discussed. During this time, we see a massive movement of African Americans out of the South, known as the Great Migration, and into northern cities, where we see a new black culture emerge in places like Harlem and northern Manhattan. The conditions in Europe and China, which were very bad, caused an influx of immigrants to flood into the United States. As we saw and mentioned earlier, the Chinese who took replacement jobs building the railroad, and the Irish too. As in the case of many of these great migratory movements, there were consequences of xenophobia against the Irish and the Chinese, the most obvious being the Chinese Exclusion Act, and many African Americans were dissuaded from leaving the South. Patrick's post did a good job at discussing the problems that mass migrations cause in American cities, especially with regard to simple things like sanitation, as there was not enough housing to keep up with the flood of people arriving into the cities. That's it for now, but I want you to continue with your excellent work, and I will touch base soon. In the meantime, please keep your good questions coming. Email is the best way to contact me immediately, but I will also be sure to see you in the threads.